Okay, we're now recording, so no blue jokes.
Got all them out of the way.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes whilst people join, and then we'll get cracking.
My favourite glasses are broken, so the only ones I've got now are my. Not a lot of people know that.
I'd have said Austin Powers.
If you don't, I told you to blow the bloody doors off.
By the way, if anybody wants any baskets, my wife's selling them. I'm trying to earn a living through my wife's baskets. They're gorgeous. They're beautiful. You know.
That's a bit too Glastonbury for me, Jay. It's way too Glastonbury.
Oh, shut up, you old punk.
Never trust a hippie.
Nice that she's using your office to store them in, Jay. That's
exactly, yeah, that's the bloody trouble. I need to get rid of the stock. It's piling up my office.
Well, I think our AD's branch needs to have a no soap dodgers policy going forward. No
okay,
crusty.
Right. Remember what I said literally 2 minutes ago about the fact that we're recording.
And I'm eating myself now as well until I might be needed.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll give it a couple of more minutes because there are still some people coming in through the participants door. So
yeah,
I'll do the introduction and also to introduce myself. My name is Nia Hughes. I'm an organising official within the London Production Division. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Huge apologies for the first time round when we did this on Wednesday as the Wednesday workshop. It was completely met with unprecedented demand and like filled out within a matter of seconds. So here we are again to discuss the incredible amount of work that not only the AD's branch have been doing, but reps across the union to ensure that you return to work safely. I'm going to be in the background. I'll be coming back later to just go through the Q&A, but if you can just be mindful of a couple of housekeeping points, and that is use the chat for chatting and use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for any questions you have for the panelists at the end of their presentation. Paul is going to take over and do a quick intro. We also have Spencer MacDonald, who is the National Secretary. No, what are you, Spencer? Yeah, National Secretary of London Production Division. We have Philippa Childs, who is the head of BECTU, and Paul Evans, who is the Assistant National Secretary of the London Production Division. And we also have Jay Arthur, Jay Lusser, and Stuart Learmonth, who are going to introduce themselves briefly very shortly. Okay, Paul, if you just want to do a quick intro, and then if we can just do a quick intro to the panel members, and then we'll get cracking.
Thanks very much, Nia. And again, I'd like to echo everything Nia said about thanking the members from the AD's branch and all of the representatives from every other branch in the London Production Division and the Regional Production Division who've put in an unprecedented amount of work into giving the industry's most detailed guidance on getting back to work. Our objective is that, as far as we're concerned, nobody should have to go back to work in a way that is unsafe. Having said that, we know that a large portion of the members in our freelance areas have not had any bailout or any income during this awful crisis. We've done everything we can on that. We'll be able to talk about that in other meetings, and I'm sure you've seen it. But we recognise that all of our members have been pulled in two directions. On the one hand, they desperately don't want to go back to work in a way that's unsafe for themselves or their families, and they desperately don't want to not be able to work if it's possible to work. So as far as we're concerned, as a union, our job has been to do everything we can to make sure that the industry is able to return to work safely, but only when it's safely. Every department will have detailed guidance, and Jay is going to be talking through this through a document that BECTU have published on the BECTU website, which is our guidance that we'll be giving to every part of the industry. But we've also been contributing to a document that the British Film Council are putting together. Again, we've been very active on this. There's been a number of meetings. There's been 4 or 5 meetings, a couple of hours long, often with hundreds of attendees, where we've been going through line by line what the BFC are doing. So that's the kind of background. You'll hear us talking about 2 separate documents today. There's the one that the British Film Council are compiling, and we're expecting that to be published before the end of the month. I can't say for certain when that date is. I don't think we know. Spencer MacDonald, who's also on this call, is leading on that. And then there's a second document which is published today on the BECTU website, which is BECTU's combined guidance on working in very many areas. That's a living document. It's a growing document. Any branches or any groups of workers who are in film and TV who want to approach the union and say that they want to work with us to add new things into that document, they're more than welcome. I'm sending out something over the next day or 2 where we're going to be inviting people who work in factual entertainment to come together on this as well. So I think that's the full background. I'd like to hand you over to Jay Lusser, who has really been, I mean, Jay's been working full time on it. I think full time would be underestimating how much work Jay has put on into this. So I'd like to hand over to Jay. And Jay, if you'd like to lead off with an outline of what our message is to our members.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. We're joined today from the AD's branch. Jay Arthur's the chair of the AD branch. Stuart Lermont is the secretary. I am a member of the branch, former committee member. The simplest, I think what we found on Wednesday is there were a lot of questions. People have a lot of questions about specific areas of coverage, what's going to happen to their departments and what's going to happen in specific scenarios. And rather than me talking on in general terms for too long, I think we're going to try and deal with those questions. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, we have a chat function and a Q&A function. If you could keep your questions into the Q&A function, and the chat function Nia will be monitoring. Stuart's going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A function, and he'll be compiling questions. Obviously, some of you will be asking more or less the same thing, so we'll try and be efficient and combine answers as much as possible. We'll start the meeting with some things that we didn't manage to cover on Wednesday, some questions which have been compiled from that meeting. And I think that will give us a bit of time just to get any new questions from today's meeting in and sorted, so that we hopefully we can answer as much as possible. We have until around 5 o'clock, so it's just under 2 hours. We managed to, on Wednesday, we still had a lot of unanswered questions at the end, so we may have a cut-off for putting questions into the chat. So if you have anything particularly you'd like to ask, do get it in there now, and we will manage those questions as we go forward. By way of an introduction, obviously the document that is now live on the BECTU website, I've just checked, it is there and available to download. The starting point for that document was really, in a way, thinking about risk assessing a film set, either studio or location, in light of what's going on around with COVID-19 and social distancing measures. So the scope for that document at the beginning was actually very, very narrow, in that it was just dealing with reducing the risk of transmission. It has expanded somewhat in that, but even just on that narrow focus, there's an awful lot to think about. The aim for the document came out of the staggered shutdown of the industry at the end of March, when we were given governmental advice which conflicted with what was actually happening on the ground, and productions were still working with people unsure whether they should be going to work or they could be doing what they were doing safely. So the discussion started almost immediately after that, with the thought that it's unlikely to be an on-off switch with this. And as we're seeing now, we're being encouraged to go back to work by the government, but there are still restrictions in place. With that thought, and also the thought that if we did go back to work in the summer and then there was another second spike in the winter, we wanted to have a set of guidelines available so that measures could be put in place to keep everybody on set safe, and enable us to work as long as possible. And as possible is the key phrase, because we don't want this document to, we're not trying to work any longer than the government deems it safe to, and we want to make sure that everybody is protected and looked after on STEP. So that by way of a sort of short introduction. And what I'd like to do is I'm just going to, whilst you're putting your questions into the Q&A, I'm just going to dive into the document. We've got, I'd say probably about 15 questions or so here. Hopefully this will address some of the things that you're thinking about as well. So first question we've got on here is, if you work on productions that don't sign in to BECTU agreements, does that mean that they then also don't follow the BECTU document guidance on COVID-19? Can I still get BECTU on my side in a dispute? Obviously, we want this document to go as far as wide into every production in the country, whether there's a BECTU agreement signed at a production level or not. So we would hope that they would all be following the guidance. I'll open the second part of the question up to Spencer. Can I still get BECTU on my side in a dispute?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, absolutely. You can. Just to make it clear, so there's two documents, because there might be some confusion. There's the British Film Commission document, which we've been working on this week, and then there's the BECTU document that's published up on the BECTU website. There's two documents. The BFC document will be across all productions and across all studios. So regardless of whether we have a collective agreement and they cover those particular productions, this is seen as an umbrella agreement, code of practice for the entire industry. If they're not following that code and you believe that there's issues that you should be raising with the union, then please, I stress to everyone that they should contact the union and make us aware, because not only could they be putting you in danger, they could be putting fellow BECTU members in danger as well. So always try and contact the union if you've got any questions in regards to the code or what they're doing on set.
Thanks, Spencer. The second question on here is, how will the union tackle potential discrimination of people who fall into the BAME, age and medical conditions groups when being contacted for future employment, or even perhaps not being contacted if line producers or producers are aware of how those make you vulnerable to COVID-19? Would you like to take that one again, Spencer?
Thanks. Well, if it's thanks, Jay. In terms of it's discrimination. If someone's particularly if someone's got a protected characteristic, it's discrimination. But it's also discrimination if it's on the grounds of race or gender. So all of those things that we want to talk to productions, because they are going to be more acutely in the lens of productions now, because they're going to be more aware in terms of health and safety. So we are talking to the productions across the board now in terms of that, because what we don't want to see is this as an excuse to filter out people that they feel that are in that category. So we want to make sure, because we've got a particular issue anyway within the industry in terms of people from certain backgrounds. So we want to make sure now that more than ever that they're actually protected. So we are having those conversations separately outside of this document with productions to make sure that that doesn't happen on the ground. However, it comes back to what we said in terms of about compliance. If people feel that there is a situation where they are being discriminated against on the grounds of gender, race or age or any of the other characteristics, then they need to contact the union as early as possible, and then we can take it out with the production, a production by production basis.
Thank you, Spencer. Does anyone else want to come in on that point at all before we move on?
I'd just like to add that the union is working and has been working for the last few weeks on pulling together a framework called a New Deal for freelancers. And this is all about the terms and conditions on which we expect the industry to return to work on in the long term, not just in the short term. But I think we've seen that the freelance working is a deal that is to some extent broken. And a lot of the terms and conditions, a lot of people have been left high and dry. So discrimination is one of those issues. So I'd urge everyone to get involved and support the New Deal for freelance work that we're going to be publishing over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Paul. So next question, slightly longer. There's been no mention of ventilations for production in industry guidelines, but there have been references in government. should be bringing in air conditioning units into studios to pump out old air. Production should also be made to guarantee running water on set locations to allow crew to regularly wash their hands, as often on-set toilets can run out of fresh water on bigger jobs with large numbers of crew. The fact that we might have to wear PPE means we're going into a known hazardous area, which sounds like it essentially contravenes all working practices. So a couple of things to address there. Ventilation. It has been talk about ventilation, whether that's helps with avoiding this transmission. Obviously, that needs to be worked out on a location and production basis. The guidelines that we're talking about mean that every production has to put into place their own safe protocols, and that will involve risk assessing every workspace, studios, and how they manage those spaces properly. So it's been mentioned in the document which is available. It's something which will vary between workspaces, but there is some anecdotal evidence that ventilation can assist, but obviously it needs to be a movement of fresh air rather than just fans blowing the same air around a sort of airtight sound studio space. There's also recommendations in the document for hand sanitizing stations, for extra hand washing facilities, for signage on that, for how productions could manage that. And in terms of PPE, there's very much the mention of appropriate use of PPE within the document. And again, that will have to be risk assessed on a production basis and on a departmental basis, depending on the workflow that you're going through. And through that, as there is still very little clear guidance on whether face masks should be worn outside of hospitals and the like, then each production is going to need to look at the current government guidelines when they're setting up and work out their safe working processes based on the best practice that we're putting out. That's what we would hope in any case. The next question is about when will the document be live? Well, it is live now. And will it be subject to review, amends and approvals from members before it's finalised or sent to the HSE, or reviewed soon after if time sensitive? Two issues there. It is a live document, a living document, as Paul said. So any branches are free to update and amend their information on there at any time. Any branches who haven't yet been included are encouraged to get in touch and put together committees to put pages together and get them involved in that document. It is for all members and all branches. As for going to the HSE, that's really the BFC document that is going to the HSE. And then to DCMS. Spencer, do you want to just summarise the next stages for that document again for us, please? The British Film Commission document.
Yeah, sure. So the British Film Commission document that we've all been tirelessly working on, and Jay's been coordinating for all of us. The submissions closed today, so midday today. So all the submissions from all the organisations that were invited to put forward their comments and suggestions. So that's gone in today. They're now collating that information, looking to see if there's any duplication between what all organisations have put in, filtering those things out first and then making the amendments. I think then they're intending to run it in past the HSE. So they want to get it signed off by the HSE once they've got a revised document. Once they've actually signed it off, then they're looking to put it in front of the DCMS. So the time frame for that is, they've estimated that they're going to probably get that document to the government by the end of this month. So we're looking about the 28th of May. And they're saying by then, if they can get it into the DCMS by the end of May, then by early June, they should have a working document in which productions could have as a code of practice across the industry.
Thank you. Next question is, it's a safety question I have, is whether first AD shall be scheduling smaller page counts per day to factor in smaller crews, slowing production speeds and thinking time for safe working practice. Simple answer is that is one of the key recommendations that we will need. Obviously, one of the things in the document is the idea of cohort working and separating out crews, which will mean that we'll be aiming to let, for example, art department do their work without anyone else working on top of them, props department the same, lighting department the same, camera department the same. So the idea with the flow of work will be more departmental specific, rather than what can happen when you've got a high page count is everyone's piling onto set at the same time trying to get their thing done and then make the day. that is something that will need to be taken into account, and obviously there is going to be a financial knock on to that for production, but the way productions are managed under this situation needs to take those things into account in order for us to work safely.
Can I just quickly add something there, Jay?
Go for it. Yeah.
Just very briefly. I mean, I did a breakdown, just so people are aware. But I did a breakdown of a production I just worked on, and it basically works out that if you conclude the COVID on a 5-day week, you're looking at least another day to a day and a half on a week. So, yeah, it's certainly something that should be recommended to first ADs to bear that in mind, and it is in the report, our updated report, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. Thanks, Jay. So in terms of, from the panelists, if anyone does want to jump in on anything, just use the hands up function, just for panelists, not for attendees, and then I can make sure I don't miss anyone. No, we haven't said that before, but I just thought it might be a useful way of moving forward. Next point is, I think there will need to be an impartial COVID safety person on set that isn't mates with production or crew and can assess things if things are being done correctly, can be talked to impartially and candidly, and can impose fines to production. The fines to production thing I can't really comment on at the moment, but yes, very much so. We absolutely recommend that there should be an impartial, independent COVID safety person on that set. Now, they could, who that person is exactly, and what their background is up for debate, but they should be a separate resource to anyone else working on that production. Because when you start totting up the to-do list of what that person would need to supervise, it isn't feasible for that to be anyone who's already got a job on that production. There's going to be too much for them to look at. So yes, that's very much part of the recommendation. What would the position be regarding food and drink on set for those who aren't able to step off? That's food and drink. It is covered in their catering and catering practices of no sort of open service, shared bowls, cutlery, the sort of pre-packaged meals, all that sort of thing. Again, it'll be a production protocols would need to be put into place for that. Got a few more of these to go through. I reckon we'll do another sort of 15 minutes of these. I think Stuart's got a few questions in the chat now, and then we'll get into the live questions from this. So thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully this is proving useful. Thinking of crew who have breathing conditions, etc., probably a high risk area for them. Transport, especially minibuses, cannot be as full anymore, will need to be cleaned after each journey. If so, can we expect to be done to a high and safe standard? How did production intend to getting back to multiple remote locations throughout the day and back? We're going to have to rethink how the days get scheduled and how the shoots get scheduled, and what the proximity is between unit bases and set. All of that needs to be rethought, because yes, you can't pile 16 people into a minibus and observe social distancing. So those protocols all need to be put into place with all productions. It's going to require some clever thinking to get those new processes into place. But yes, the idea would be the independent COVID supervisor would supervise a cleaning crew who would deal with cleaning alongside help from any of the the drivers of the buses. There's talk of possibly partitioning between driver and passenger. There's a big transportation section. Unit drivers have been very involved in helping us put that information into the BECTU document. As with a lot of this, we don't have all the answers. This is the document probably raises more questions than it answers, but then it gives hopefully a framework for productions to put together their own shooting protocols. Next point is a cooling period between handling kit may also prove useful, as it would encourage hire companies and production offices to plan further ahead. For example, Panavision at present will not touch kit for 72 hours after a crew has had contact with it. This could ensure all kit is ready for crew and mean not having prep produced to the absolute minimum level. Kit handling could be limited to one departmental member with PPE supplied, sent any rental house by prior production, or will they need to bring their own if they feel the need to use it? We recommend that production should supply all PPE that's required to be worn by crews. As for equipment, I know they mentioned Panavision there, ARI Media were talking about quarantining all equipment on the way out for 72 hours and on the way in for 72 hours. There's been talk about whether on delivery to set, equipment can be delivered into effectively like a locker, a drive-in, a small stage space, or that the vehicle or the equipment could be left in for 72 hours, all based on the idea that the virus can only survive on hard surfaces for 72 hours, which would then make it less, make the cleaning processes less onerous. So again, all of these things are being worked out by the hire companies will need to be talked about by the productions crewing up. So next question is, what will the union do for those in our department who may find their jobs are at risk in the industry over this year? Equally, what is the decision on hiring dailies across departments? I'll take the second part of that, and then maybe I can hand the first part over to you, Spencer, if that's okay. The second part about dailies, this came up in the BFC document, and it has been discussed to great deals. The recommendation really is to rethink how dailies are hired, and if they can, so we're not going from one very crude day on a Monday to a lesser crude day on a Tuesday to a higher crude day on a Wednesday, so on and so forth. So the crewing levels could be considered more in a block, allowing more continuity of employment, and also reducing the amount of sort of individual interactions with the set that change from day to day. The idea would be that the people will still get employed, because some people obviously always work in the dailies bracket, but hopefully those contracted periods would be longer than just individual days scattered out across the production and more concentrated. Again, something for production to think about and for us to think about as we're scheduling up productions. And then I've got, I'll go through quickly a couple of camera specific questions. We had a lot of camera team on the last call, and these are a couple of things that we didn't get through. We've got one: would on-set DIT monitoring be affected? Would DITs be expected to distance themselves to their vans of years of old to process rushes? I would say it wouldn't be expected or mandated that DITs can't come anywhere near to set. It depends how the DOP uses their DIT. But protocols will need to be put into place, and it would depend what the location is or what the studio is as to where that person can safely be. Obviously, departmental areas will need to be set out on all stages, so that we're not getting, so they're only being used by that cohort of workers. So be it the arts department area or the lighting technicians area, camera store, whatever those are, those need to be areas which are only interacted with those crews. And the same can be said for the DIT. Processes will obviously need to be put into place in terms of handling cards, rushes, so it would apply to sound rushes as well. So all of those processes will need to be worked out by the production within the production risk assessment, and so that transmission risk is reduced. Could a comm system be set up so that crew who do not need to enter set get close to DOP directed cast can pass notes without slowing down the shoot due to social distancing restrictions? It says this worked well on shoot filming on ice, and therefore departments just needed to pass on notes rather than be physically present at all time. Yes, absolutely. Use of radios. Oh, sorry, I realised I didn't go back to Spencer on, but I just rattled on. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Yes, use of radio communications, use of headsets, use of monitoring to the PAs, perhaps. All of those things can be put into place, but all of those things are on the table. It just needs to be productions thinking about how those work. What the question, so I was going to come to you, Spencer, and then I rattled on, was the question: what will the union do for those in the department who may find their jobs at risk in the industry over the next year?
Thanks. I thought I was at risk of losing my job then when you went over me.
Sorry.
I think part of this whole process is monitoring what happens, because the thing is, everything's changing from week to week. You know, the guidance from the government in terms of how the industry is interpreting that guidance and how it's actually going to be played out on set. So we need to monitor it, and I think that's the key to the whole of this process, really, to make sure that it's implemented how it should be, and it's paramount that it's implemented, for people to return safely. But equally, we want to make sure, and I think the question was in regards to, was their jobs at risk? Because there will be certain areas, and I think, we've discussed it in terms of the BFC document, in terms of the size of the crews, about the crowd numbers that are going to be required, and all those sorts of things. So there will be an immediate impact in terms of all of those sorts of things. And I know the industry is having conversations in terms of, you know, how they're going to try and mitigate that, because they want to resume filming as quickly as possible. They want to try and turn the films around in the same, you know, time frame. So they're going to have to look at all different formats in terms of how they achieve that. So I'm hoping that it won't risk anyone's job. However, I think that we need to monitor this, and we need to monitor it closely to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Spencer. So, Stuart, I've got another about 5 minutes worth of questions here, and then we can get into the ones from the Q&A in this session.
Perfect. I'm compiling at the moment. I'm going to go back to the video and.
Thank you. So a couple more questions here about working processes. Talking about monitors, how monitoring would happen around set using. So again, questions. Playback operator in a playback department would be ideal. You can use things like QTake server or TerraViewer, which allow streaming within a closed network to any device. I think one of them only operates on Apple devices, but you can essentially download an app and stream the playback monitoring onto iPads or phones, enabling a way of stopping sort of the huddle around monitors. People can be more distant and in their own areas and still be keeping an eye on playback, but obviously that requires a department or at least a playback operator or a department to arrange that rather than it falling on a camera assistant. Then in terms of shift working and safe working practices, where you get a logjam at the beginning of the day, if everything's very busy in one place and then everything spreads out, again, workflows will have to be thought through and worked out within different departments as how we can amend that, whether that becomes split calls or different ways of prep, where how the kit's prepped, and like all of these things do need to be worked out. Like I said, we don't have all the answers on these. And then the final one on this that we missed out the other day, thank you for listening through this. I hope this answered some of your questions. It says, how do camera operators, DOPs and grips work together, as it would be hard to have enough distance? So this is interesting. The idea of cohort working or zonal working has come up and been discussed in various formats. Again, this will depend on the production and how and we'll learn as we go forward what the best way is to proceed. But there are suggestions that you can either work as described earlier. So one department does their work, steps away, another department comes in, carries on, and so on and so forth. But there's always going to be what some people are referring to as a hot zone, which would be everything immediately around camera, where you've got the issues of cast, costume and makeup checks. You've got camera in there, setting marks, getting placing eye lines, lighting adjustments, all that kind of thing. So one of the ideas that's been talked about is this zonal system, which I know they're starting, talking to a colleague in Norway who are starting shooting next week or the week after, and they're operating a zonal system where the zone 1 is the hot zone around camera, and that becomes the working cohort. So effectively you're the camera operator, director, first AD, and some others are always in that cohort working together. Zone 3 is for anyone who's on standby, and there's an offset, people who never step onto set. And in between, so in zone 2, that becomes a disinfection zone. They're going to get, they're saying they're going to send some protocols over to me to say how that works. But the idea is that everything moving from zone 3 or anything moving into zone 1 goes through some kind of disinfection process. I say some kind of process because all of this is new to everybody. So everything's being worked out as we go along. And if you think that we only shut down, what was it, 6-7 weeks ago? It's all happened at, we're getting this through at incredible pace. So anyone who has ideas with that, obviously as you're setting up your productions and figuring out your safe working processes, everything's on the table in terms of how we can work safely. Great, I think that covers the leftovers from Wednesday. Thank you for your patience on that. Stuart, would you like to come in and we'll try and go through some of the questions that have come in on the Q&A in the last half an hour?
Yes, that sounds very good to me. Thank you everybody for submitting your questions. What I've tried to do is bunch them best in, as a lot of questions do have some overlap. So as I read each one out, hopefully that will address a number of concerns and questions in each go. A couple of attendees and David Watts have asked Jay, What are your thoughts about starting a COVID-19 helpline for breaches of the BECTU document? And if not, how would such an email helpline work? Who'd be manning it, and what training would they have? And a point about how can the guidelines be enforced, and what happens if a production does not adhere to the guidelines?
Spencer, are you able to give us anything on that in terms of helpline and enforcement? I think we touched on it earlier, but if you give us any more detail. And sorry, just before you do, I noticed some people in the chat are referring to the BFC document. The link that was posted is for the BECTU document. The BFC document is a consultation document which has gone in to them. That's not published, that document, yet, and that won't be for a few weeks. But I just checked the link on the BECTU page and it is working. I'll post it for you again now. So over to you, Spencer.
Yeah, so thanks, Jay. We did briefly touch on it earlier in terms of what people should do. On the Back to Work page, where that with the link you're actually talking about, Jay, we should be setting up a help. Well, it won't be a helpline; it'll be an email address. It'll be a COVID-19 email address. We've already got the email address up and running, and we're going to post it up on the site. And it will be for so that we can actually channel, all the the comments or anything else that people want to raise. So that will be up and running shortly. So that will be on there. In terms of the training, so this is an issue really that cuts across the industrial business that all the officials are doing every day. It's a health and safety issue. So all the officials are very experienced and experts in terms of what we need to do to combat the productions if they're choosing to challenge the code or do something outside of the code. So it'll be routed through to the officials in the first instance, and then depending on the circumstances, then we can take it where we need to take it, whether it's back to the HSE or back to another government enforcement agency. But that would be the route. We're hoping to update that page shortly. So that should be hopefully updated late next week.
Okay, thanks, Spencer. And just on the note about terms and conditions and the industrial side of things, any of you who are any of you on LPD, RPD, A&E, and IB should have received an email earlier today with the bite-sized training for next week, and included in that email is a return to work advice and guidance session regarding terms and conditions live input session. As members, you'll have that. I'm not going to. I can't put out the link in this chat because obviously that stays within BECTU at the moment. But all of you within the union should have had that. If you haven't, for any reason, get in touch with your branch. Next one, then, please, Stuart.
Okay, next question comes from Anita Gupta and also from Stan Fuss with regards, should we be signing any waivers as regards COVID-19 going into a production? And then Anita expands on that with the advice, with the case of non-shoot crew who tend to work away from studio in varying environments, specifically relating to production buyers, because they go into various environments, would they try and make them sign a responsibility clause as they'll be off-site?
In terms of the waiver, it's our understanding that waivers don't have any legal enforcement right in this country. You can't sign away your right to be looked after at work. Spencer, please jump in on me if I'm saying this wrong. But I think that's the situation. So in terms of you can't sign away your rights to be to due care and attention being exercised in the workplace. Is that right?
Absolutely. The production's got a duty of care, and the thing is, you're protected under the Health and Safety at Work Act anyway. So the productions, regardless of whatever they choose to issue, I haven't heard this being suggested. It's certainly from any of the conversations that we're having with productions at the moment, that they do that. I'm not saying that they won't, and they won't try it. And if they do, then obviously you should contact BECTU immediately. But you can't, there is no waiver that has any standing or any force in terms of waiving your statutory rights to health and safety. So if they do choose to do that, it wouldn't have any force anyway in law, so they couldn't do that. But at the same time, if they do choose to do that, then that's a worrying sign, and you should immediately contact the union.
On the other part of that comment, which is to do with crew who work away from set, so buyers and the like, I know your branches, particularly in terms of the art department, set deck, costume departments, particularly done a lot of work on this in terms of putting in place protocols which would allow though people who need to go out and do buying and bring stuff back, how the handover of that the items happens, keeping the people who are buying safe and keeping the interactions with people on the crew perhaps to more limited. So again, have a look at those branch guidelines. There's certainly been no talk about signing anything. You're asking buyers to sign anything as Anita was suggesting. Just before we move on to the next one, just a note from Paul. Obviously, the document on the website. I'll just read out. We're asking everyone not to distribute the document itself. Please only distribute the link. On the front page of the document is a version control, and obviously we said this is a live document, so it will get updated regularly. It's been updated twice in the last week. Please don't distribute the document. If anyone wants to see it, send them to the website where they can be sure that they're downloading the most up-to-date version. Right, thank you. Stuart.
Okay, next one is from Fiona Greaves, and it's a short one. Will I be able to see a production's COVID-19 risk assessment before going to work?
You should be able to, I would say. I mean, the production should have a risk assessment in place. It's the question of whether it's before you're signing your contract or before you're attending the workplace. Certainly before attending the workplace, you should be able to see a risk assessment, but it'll depend on at what stage you're joining the production, I suppose, and at what level and what stage of production or pre-production you're involved in, and whether that has been completed at that stage. But certainly anything that you're being asked to go into do as a worker, there should be a relevant risk assessment to enable you to go in to work safely. I hope that answers that question. I'm noticing a couple of questions going into the chat. If you could please pop your questions into the Q&A, we'll get through as many as we can.
Yeah,
Stu, next one, please.
Yeah, all questions in the Q&A, please. I am, as much as I've edited the ones that came through as we were answering for the first half hour, I have still got them coming through, and I will miss them if they go into the chat. Stuart Hall and Jim Robertson have asked a very similar question about what do we do about putting radio mics on talent, and how could miking up be done in any sort of guidelines?
Have a look at the document. Sound department and costume department have been thinking about this and talking about this. Processes again will need to be put into place in the practical processes when you're on the floor as to how that works, but there has been a lot of thought from the branches on that. One of the ideas is that you allocate specific radio mics to specific casts throughout for longer periods. That you might have additional help in disinfecting equipment. That one crew member deals with the miking itself, and there's one costume member who assists. So you have no crossover between crew, and maybe enhanced PPE would need to be worn by those people when working in very close proximity. Possibly the mics could already be pre-rigged into costume as one option. So there's all sorts of possible measures that are being discussed. So please have a look at the document. If you feel anything more useful can be added, get in touch with your branch reps.
Perfect. Next one.
Yes, please.
I have this similar sentiments expressed from David Clayton, Anne Bryson and Kendrick Fowler with regards essays. What's going to be best practice in dealing with background artists, with reference particularly to holding areas being more conducive to social distancing, and the fact that costume fittings and haircuts, etc., would be in violation of any social distancing rules? Yeah,
again, I'd just like to say that hair and makeup branch and costume branch have done an enormous amount of work on this, and they're really ahead of the curve on processes that will need to be put in place in order to allow them to do what they need to do. In terms of our supporting cast colleagues, holding areas would need to be expanded. All of that needs to be taken into consideration when planning a production and the facilities available to the production. there's also the FAA have been very involved in this process as well. One of the, there's talk of things like more, obviously longer warning in advance with booking, so it's not the night before, so better planning can be made, that better information can be provided digitally the night before, so that people have perhaps a digital map on their confirmation so they can see exactly where they need to go on arrival. For, depending on the period, obviously for modern day, it may be more, it's more likely that supporting us will probably be asked to wear their own clothes, do their own hair and makeup. For situations where it's more difficult to do that for period pieces and the like, then that needs to be worked out with the, with the protocols being put together by the by hair and makeup and wardrobe departments. So again, I don't have all the answers for you, but it is being thought about. And if you have anything, you look at the document. If you have anything you want to add, or you want to talk to the your reps, please get in touch with the FAA. Next one, please, Stu.
Okay, this one is from someone that wishes to remain anonymous, saying, now the government has approved an antibody test from Roche. Is the union going to try and source some of these for their members? But once we can test who has already had COVID, should these people be able to return to work safely without getting in the way of frontline staff getting these first?
At the moment, as I understand it, and please, Spencer, jump in here if you want to say anything. As I understand it, that Roche test is only a clinical test. It's not the fabled home antibody test, which 3 million of which were bought and then found to be not as reliable as would have been liked. So at the I would say at the moment there isn't the ability to take that antibody test and provide it on a production basis, or even for union to provide it to their members basis. As for, I think what you're angling at with the antibody test and the rather unfortunately titled immunity passport, which seems to have largely gone away in discussions at the moment, we don't know. Is the simple. This is all things that are still developing in this situation. We don't. There's still no clear evidence whether a build-up of antibodies gives you any direct immunity. And actually, one thing I've not seen is there hasn't been any discussion about whether, even if you have the antibodies, whether you can still pass on the infection. So in terms of getting back to work, it's even if there was an antibody test or immunity passport, I don't think it should have any bearing on the health and safety measures that are being put in place on set, because they are there to protect everyone on the set. Anything you want to add, Spencer?
That's fine. I think you've covered it really, and I'm not too sure in terms of, it comes down to the production. I think it will vary in terms of the testing, or what they do, from production to production, and so. But in terms of the union actually, providing those test kits at the moment, there is no, plan being talked about in terms of doing that, because I think, as you've said, that it's been identified that it's not conclusive in terms of those, tests. So I think you've probably covered it, Jay.
I'm sure we'll all know straight away if they find the magic antibody test, which is conclusive, and we know that we can, if we've had it, we won't get it again. Yeah, next one, please, Stu.
Next one comes from Simon Damast and also from Maria Marancho. Would this include UK productions done outside of the UK? And as a result of that, what would be done for planning for shooting in other countries? Would quarantine on arrival and return be necessary?
That's completely a governmental issue, and it will depend on the territory which you're going to and coming back from. It's always, you're always going to have to defer to the guidelines, rules and regs in the territory in which you're shooting. How that works in terms of responsibility, if it's a UK-based production shooting overseas, I don't really know, but I think obviously the first stopping point is always with the local territory. And Spencer's been doing a lot of work with Uni Global, who are an association of trade unions and industry bodies around the world. And there's been a lot of discussion with them about COVID measures. Do you want to add anything on that at the moment, Spencer?
Not really, just to probably say, yeah, we are part of Uni May and Uni, I think it's called Uni Global, which is a collection of all the audiovisual unions across the globe. And we have been sharing, data in terms of, getting back to work, because certain countries are going back quicker than others. So there's certain lessons to be learned in terms of, what they're doing and how we might be able to adopt some of those practices. So we are sharing that information. And just in terms of, if you're covered under the code of practice, whether that applies, outside of the UK, even within the UK, there are differences, in the nations. If you look at the First Minister in Scotland and, Wales and Northern Ireland, they're all doing, they're coming out of the lockdown slightly differently. So it will vary, even in the UK, in terms of how, how the back to work plan goes. So it's not just about, outside of the UK, it's also within the UK.
Thank you. Next one, please, Stuart.
Okay, this is quite a common one from a number of anonymous attendees and via Edward Ames, to do with the idea of the separate COVID-19 coordinator supervisor, in regards to what background should that person have, purely medical, health and safety, or an AD, location manager, production manager, fulfilling just that role and that role only on that production. By the same token, would they be independent, so they can be truly impartial? For a dedicated COVID-19 supervisor to be truly impartial and independent, do they need to be paid for other than through the production?
Okay, a couple of things to deal with there. So in terms of who that person is, at the moment it's still being worked out. Obviously, you have in the industry, we have health and safety professionals, health and safety consultants, who can come in and do risk assessments on productions, and there are several health and safety companies out there who already provide that service, and those companies are also developing now COVID-19 specific training. I had a conversation with one earlier today where they were saying that they expect the supervisor role, to be someone from probably a senior, mid to senior management level, already with experience on set, because as we are anyone in that position in the industry should already have a good grasp of health and safety procedures. They need to take some additional training in terms of COVID management and the measures that might need to be put into place. They would be an additional person, an additional resource on set. They would be, inevitably, they would be hired by the production and paid for by the production. And they would report, ultimately, I would have thought, to whoever's the responsible person on that production for health and safety, be that the health and safety officer, or whether the health and safety buck stops with the producer. Now, they should be an independent person in terms of their actions and what they can do. They shouldn't ever be under any pressure to not take the right course of action because of any financial or scheduling issues or anything like that. So it could be, like you say, it could be an assistant director, it could be a production manager, it could be a producer, but they need to be separate from the day-to-day, from the regular running of that production in terms of the page count and what needs to be achieved on that production. It needs to be an independent person. Have I sort of covered most of that, Stu?
Yes, and then I split this one up just because there were a lot of people asking about it, and there were more specific points I'm going to go into now. It seems the APA guidelines don't seem to be keen on appointing a medic specifically for the role of COVID-19 supervisor, and instead the option to appoint a crew member. What is the response to that?
Okay, I shall have to choose my words quite carefully here. Where to start? So the APA guidelines do have in their guidelines a line which says that there should be a responsible person for COVID-19 health and safety matters, whether that be a separately hired individual or a nominated member of crew. Now, our position is that it should be an additional resource, and it shouldn't be someone nominated on the crew for reasons I've already laid out, and that the to-do list is just much too big. As for hiring a medic, we as a branch believe there should be a medic on every shoot. There are discussions obviously about scale. If you're talking about a shoot which has 3 or 4 people on it, should they be able to manage their health and safety within within themselves? Should there need to be an additional person on that? They're just saying there's discussions going on about that at the moment. Our opinion is there should be someone on every job who's looking after that. Stuart, I've rambled slightly. If I picked up anything, is there anything I should pick up more on that?
Not really. No, I'll move on to the next part of these questions then. Will HODs be responsible for monitoring and supervising new ways of work for their departments, or will that be producers' responsibility? And then Sophia Theophilou, I really hope I've said that correctly, has asked, will BECTU run a specific COVID-19 certification course? And equally, would there be training to make sure all HODs would have a relevant knowledge?
So what was the first part of that question, Stuart, again? It was HODs, yes.
HODs
so,
monitoring.
In health and safety and production, obviously, everyone has a responsibility for their own health and safety, and HODs do have a responsibility for their department's health and safety, and the production have an overall responsibility for the production safety. None of that's going to change. So there will need to be, HODs will be as responsible for their department as they've ever been. And having the additional supervisor on set will help keep an overview on the set, rather than it being rather than a producer in an office who has the responsibility but isn't on the floor. Pre-COVID-19, obviously, each department has the responsibility for the health and safety of their department, and that's managed, 999 times out of 1,000, that's managed brilliantly. And so the producer doesn't need to be on set all of the time. But in this, it is going to need a greater level of supervision. As for training, so there's a couple of different levels on this. There is talk of a short briefing, a short brief training of sort of like an awareness of COVID health and safety, which could be made available to all crew starting on productions, and that could take the form of some kind of online or video-based or animation-based product, which outlines the basics, and that's just for each crew. It would become like a standard safety briefing you might have if you're shooting in a high-risk environment. Above that would be sort of the COVID-19 risks training, which could be, I know there's a couple of providers out there who are already running these courses. No Screen Skills are also developing. And BECTU we're starting to have discussions with BECTU about having something that would run in bite-size, part of the bite-size training program. It's not ready yet. We haven't started kind of putting it together yet. But the idea would be that BECTU could provide something of the sort of an enhanced awareness program, which would be, I think, I'm not speaking out of turn, but the idea was for it to be free to all members. There may be that would be sort of an enhanced awareness thing for HODs. Some of the training programs that are being offered out there at the moment, and talk to the training provider before you sign up and find out where they're pitching this as a level at. I know one of us speaking to earlier on today saying they feel that their COVID-19 speciality course paired with something like the CRISP training or safe working, practice, safe working and safe management of productions could be then sufficient for a sort of supervisor role on set who isn't the health and safety officer, so someone who's got more broad overview. So it's all being put together at the moment. BECTU are working on something. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, next one. Or Spencer,
Spencer, did you want to come in? No, okay, thank you.
No. Okay, next one is Jamie Harcourt and also Tom Cholmondeley, asking about BECTU public liability insurance. Is it still valid, or can it be extended to include the risks of COVID-19 and infecting interviewees and crew? Or does that mean a sole trader or limited company could be held responsible for accidental spread of the virus?
Before I hand this over, I just want to say that obviously the issue of the incubation process, this has come up a couple of times, is that it's going to be very difficult to establish liability if you end up getting COVID-19, because it's going to be very difficult to prove exactly where you picked it up. Having said that, who'd like to take on the question? Philippa.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we haven't had any specific discussions with Hensilla around it, but I think because it's an illness as opposed to an accident, that that it would be very difficult to prove liability. I don't know if Spencer agrees with that view.
Yeah, it's a third-party type of insurance. So it's if you caused accident or injury to a third party. So, and the other issue with insurances at the moment, particularly, is that no insurer is actually covering, the pandemic, at the moment. So there's no way that we could get an extension in terms of the cover, even if it was within scope of the insurance to cover, this particular pandemic, because they're just not covering it because of, the liabilities would just be too enormous. So the public liability still stands, still covers you for exactly the same things that it covered you, before, and that's running. And I think we mentioned at the previous webinar that there's a 2-month as well, which the unions actually extended it for. They've given you that for for free. So it's still there, but it won't be extended. I can assure people it won't be extended to that because there's no insurance company on the land that's prepared to cover the the pandemic, unfortunately.
Can I just add in relation to the 2 months free? So we will be, particularly those who are who pay normally through direct debit, we will be writing to you soon to collect that money, unfortunately. But we need to give you notice of that, and then we need to collect the money during June so that we can get the certificates to you for the 1st of July. So just be aware of that. And if you pay directly, then through June, obviously you'll need to make that payment.
Thank you. Just before we move on, I've noticed Fergus Wright has put something in the chat, which is indeed a really cool thing. It's he's put a link in there. Hopefully you can see it. It's commercialsproducersireland.com COVID-19. It's just a very useful infographic of how the commercial producers in Ireland are dealing with the problem. It's one of the sort of the clearer bits of the clearer things we've seen coming out of the industry in the last couple of weeks. Great, Stuart, next question, please.
Just one from Adam Morris. Are we happy for this safety document to be shared with line producers and unit production managers in its current form?
Hey Adam, I hope you're well. Yes, share the link, not the document, please. Share the link to the page, just in case it gets updated. Make sure they're getting the most recent one. But yes, we're happy for that to be shared with the industry. It is on a public page, isn't it? It's not behind the paywall, right?
Yeah, it's on the public. It's not. It does. You don't have to go. You don't have to log in. You can go directly to the link. So it's an open link. Thanks.
Next one, please, Stu.
Okay. I'm gonna deal with a question asked by two people, an anonymous attendee and David Stafford, with regards actors. In terms of one of the main issues is going to be actors working closely together within 2 meters. There are cheats that can be done. Are there any thoughts on this apart from quarantining for 14 days before the shoot? And similarly, consideration as to how directors work with actors, with block scenes, with large ensembles, HODs, and impacting schedule, the impact of that amongst the schedule.
Yes, that does need to be worked out. I know Equity have been doing a lot of work in the consultation process in terms of the actors side of it. There is, I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer for you, an easy checklist on this one. It will depend on depend on the script and the production and where you're shooting and how you're shooting. There has been talk of trying to reduce the number of crew who are around the set on during the director's rehearsal, and whether that the rehearsal can be transmitted via the playback system that we were talking about earlier, so wireless, so people can watch it from further away. I'm afraid I can't give you any more answers on that at the moment. as we get onto set and as we get back into production, we'll be needing to put those processes into place and work out the best ways and most sensible ways of working, whether it be a zonal system or cohorts as discussed. Jay, you've come up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just came out of a discussion yesterday with somebody else with for close interaction of cast as far as that's concerned. There was talk of some form of quarantine given that situation, and it is something that is being thought about abroad at the moment. How we actually get that close, intimate interaction with cast. So it is something that is being thought about in other places, whether it's too expensive to actually carry out. But that is definitely, people are thinking about that and may come into effect in this country through things like Netflix and any American productions that are coming out over here. But it's not specifically detailed in any of our documents at the moment, as far as I'm aware.
No. One of the things I would say is if you are being approached by productions to shoot and there's anything you're concerned about in terms of being asked to quarantine for a period or anything like that, or you've got questions about the contract, do contact your branch in the first instance, who can get in touch with your national official, and then into BECTU, and then they can help you with any questions that you may have specific to shoots that are coming up. Right, next please.
Okay, I'm going to deal with a number of questions from some anonymous attendees, from Peter Freeman and Robert Orr, with regards to if a freelance worker should fall ill with COVID during a shoot, so they may be expected to self-isolate for 14 days. Currently sick pay is 1 to 3 days, depending on production discretion. Can sick pay be insured to cover the isolation period to avoid risk of people hiding illness and the job being kept open for the sick worker to return on recovery? And Peter notes that an issue would be people not reporting to work, even they suspect they might be sick. How could they be protected from the pressure of loss of earnings?
Yeah, all very good questions. And we certainly recommend that this document that we put together is very much to do with the safe working practices, and we haven't touched into the terms and conditions and industrial issues surrounding it, which there is the session next week. Check your bite size. There is a return to work advice and guidance regarding terms and conditions live input session. That's on Monday next week. Check your emails. You should have had a message through from BECTU regarding that. Certainly we recommend that each production will need to put their own protocols in place for how this works. How the financial side works, I can't comment on, and I don't think there's anything that we can draw on at the moment, but I know the union will be, well, let me not put any words into Spencer's mouth. What could you say? Can you say anything on this at the moment, Spencer or Paul?
Yeah, we're going to be consulting. So like you said, Jay, there's going to be a meeting next week to draft up in terms of, what we want to see for, conditions in those particular circumstances. So we haven't got anything at the moment. We've got a few headings, people have identified that, there are certain things that they feel that, we should give some advice and guidance on. So that would be the purpose of the meeting next week, where we do draw that up. So most of our efforts at the moment have been in terms of just making sure, as Jay said, in terms of, the health and safety and the welfare of, the crew when they do return. But the next step is, important, and that's why we're having this meeting next week. And then once we draw that up, that would be the guidance. So we're asking as many people as possible to join that meeting. Hopefully you've seen the notice that's gone out. And then following that meeting, we'll be issuing some guidance in terms of what we believe should be, the right practices that production should adopt.
Yeah, I definitely encourage as many people as possible to join that discussion. And what I would also say, just in case anyone's joined the meeting late, the document that's up on the site there, it's a live document. It's not a final position. It's our position today. It is. There's probably things that are missed in there. There's typos. There'll be things that will be wrong in there more than likely. If you want to get involved, you think there's sections missing or broader things that are missing in there which need more addressing, then please get involved. Write something. Get your branches together. Put something together. Get it over to us. Unfortunately, we can't write it all for you. as much as we'd like to. But it's better coming from the branches themselves, because you guys are the experts in your field, and you know more of the granular detail than we ever could. So please, do bring yourselves together to put this, to put anything else into that document that you think belongs there. Stuart, should we go next one?
That's fine. I had one more question about what we've just discussed with regards to self-isolation and sickness, and then funnily enough I might as well employ the question that ties into what you just said. So the first question is, do you think it would be necessary and prudent all crew members are signed up to the government tracing app, and would you want this to be a prerequisite?
It's still being trialled at the moment. We're all reading the news. We can all see that it might not be working as well as everyone thought, and there might be security issues with it, and they might be moving to a more decentralized model. It needs to be discussed as and when it becomes, as and when the trial's finished, and as when we know there's real sort of efficiency around it, or whether it actually works. Interestingly, there was again on a discussion with a health and safety provider yesterday. They've got these devices which you wear as lanyards, which are sort of just a closed network thing, and they log individual interactions on set with people. So if for example somebody does display symptoms or is diagnosed with illness, you can then map back just through the production core who's been in the sort of close proximity working with that up until that point. And I think there's he was saying they're not cheap, and it might not be something that's practical, but there are technologies being looked at. As for the track and tracing app, and until we know more from the government level, I don't think we can say.
Okay. And in that case, relative to what you said about others inputting into this, I would guess that you've answered this question already. Someone from the wardrobe and costume branch who crosses over film, TV and theatre says the needs of theatre are very different. Will there be more focusing on return to work in theatre and live show situations, as they're already building risk assessments for fittings as soon as August? They have found this document incredibly helpful, but the feeling is that there should be more specific guidance for theatre sooner rather than later.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do have something of a background in theatre, but not for many, many years. And I think those branches who are specific in theatre and who are the experts in theatre as it is need to be writing their own pages, which I'm sure Bectu will then publish. It's like I say, it needs to come from you, the experts, to make sure that it covers all the points that are necessary. Philippa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to say that I think the horizon for theatres isn't looking too promising at the moment, but and so I think we're really looking a bit further down the line, but I'm sure that work will be going on as we anticipate a return to work in theatres. So yes, is the answer, I think.
Philippa, while you're there, I noticed in the Q&A there was one of the first questions we had, which you noted you were going to address, is have more film and TV practitioners joined the union since lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally across the economy, trade unions have had a boost in terms of membership, but we've had a really incredible response from new members. So yes, in March, April, and looking like this month too, we're sort of adding on about 600, 500 new members a month. So that's really good, and long may it continue.
Thank you. Sorry, Stu, just a procedural one. Sorry if everyone this is boring. Are you getting the chance to delete the questions that we've been answered, or to mark them down on the chat as we go through?
I am, as this happens, I am answering them live or getting the next lot ready so that they go into the live box.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so let's have the next one. We've got about 45 minutes or so left. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. I would suggest probably, what do you think, Stu? We probably won't get to any more than are on there already, or how are you feeling?
I think we are. I think we're going to have to say
Five more minutes for any questions.
Next 5 minutes. We won't take questions after 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Okay, so your cut off for asking questions will be at 22 minutes past 4.
22 minutes past 4. Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
This next raft of questions comes into what's surrounding smaller crews, and this is a mishmash of questions from Peter Freeman, Edward Ames, Harriet Crate, Suvi Wallander, and Ina Luders. So I'll try and pull these apart.
Ina, hi, how are you?
Hi Ina, hi Peter, hi Suvi as well. Companies talking about smaller crews makes sense at the moment, but how do we protect junior members from those grades, which are also part of their training, disappearing long term? And also there is concern that certain jobs will fall by the wayside, and it's the thin end of the wedge, and may set a precedent.
Okay. Again, that does fall outside of the scope of what we've put in here. Can I throw that one over to you, either Paul or Spencer, to talk about? Oh,
yeah, mouse didn't want to work for a minute. Too much Zoom. So yeah, I think it comes back to a couple of things. One is in terms of monitoring the situation. So across the board, not just trainees and juniors. I think there's an issue that this could affect lots of people in different ways. So I think we need to monitor that. We need to have a conversation with productions in regards to what they're doing to protect and make sure that people aren't discriminated against, which we touched on right at the beginning. But also, part of the discussion we're going to have next week about the conditions, that could feed into that particular process as well. So we want to make sure that the juniors and, the runners and, the trainees all feel protected. So we want to incorporate that into, any advice and guidance that we give, not just about the terms and conditions to make sure people are protected monetarily, but make sure they feel protected, that their jobs are, protected as well. So that can form part of the conversation we have next week. But I think, there's going to be such a broad range of different productions doing different things. So you're going to get major motion pictures and the high-end TV who have the resources to probably do it properly. And then you have the lower budgets and the smaller micro indie budgets, which are going to struggle in terms of implementing some of these things. And I think that's where you're going to probably see some of these challenges. So there, we probably need to spend a lot more time in terms of monitoring those and making sure that they do implement things safely, but also make sure that they're not doing things that, it's been described in some of the comments today. So we will be monitoring it, and it comes back to also what I said about, intelligence, about making sure that we actually receive, information from members when they do witness this or they do hear about things, to make sure they inform the union so that we can actually act on it as well. Thanks.
Thanks. I hope that answers your questions, guys. Where we go to next, Stu? Okay.
In terms of some of that, anonymous attendee said there have been, because of crew numbers needing to be reduced. What about where sizes of the teams are needed to actually work together to move to use equipment? Or thinking most in terms of practical SFX.
Okay. Yes. Again, so there's a fundamental sort of dichotomy in the whole process here, is that one of the simplest ways of avoiding transmission is to have less people interacting. One way of achieving that is, like I say, cohort working, keeping smaller units working together within the crew so that you've got less departmental interaction. Another way is to have less people on the set at any one time, which means separating these zones out so more people are in offset areas rather than onset areas. But obviously a lot of these measures are going to require more people to enforce them. In terms of where there's workflow that involves necessary close contact working, where you need 2 people to carry something or to prep something, or you need to be working closely together, as is the case around camera. Safe processes will need to be put into place, and we'll take our lead from those departments' own risk assessments within the main guidelines. Obviously, we can't tell you how to do your job the best way. You guys are the experts in that, but we need you to think about how you need to do it safely. And if that means for certain tasks you're going to need enhanced PPE, maybe it's, then that's what needs to be thought through. So again, everything's on the table. We don't, we're aware that there might be a push to try and have less people on set, but obviously you need people to be able to do the job. So if it's a smaller, if the scope of the job is smaller, you still need to have the right amount of people to do the job, but you need to be able to have your workflow managed in such a way that you're going to be able to do it safely. So this is still all of this is work in progress, I'm afraid. Next one, please, Stu.
Okay, and again from the same bunch of questions, I'll get to Ina's questions. Also, Suvi, I hope what Spencer has said to the first part of your question answers your concern about the way that we're doing things now being prevented from becoming the norm. But Ina says that there are very few facilities that have the amount of space to accommodate a lot of these safety and disinfection zones. Because of this and the length of shoots stretching out, does this mean that there will be fewer shoots being able to happen at the same time, and as such that might keep a lot of technicians out of work?
I think, hi again, Ina. I think you might be thinking about this. We need to think about this slightly sideways. In that, I don't think anyone's really thinking that we're going to get back to the same level of production that we had prior to the shutdown in March for quite some time. So whilst we're going through this crisis, I think that by necessity there will be less productions happening in all sectors. So I take your point about the facilities, and if we were at the same level of production as we were and we were trying to do the same amount of shoots, we'd have a real problem. But I think as we go back to work, I think there's going to be less jobs happening, and that will give us the space to be able to get these protocols working well, so that as more jobs come online, we're more efficient with it. That's what I'd hope. Maybe I'm over optimistic, but that's kind of how we're, what we're thinking of at the moment. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
I think you have to look at the examples in terms of what's happening in the other countries, and they are reduced, massively reduced, size crew, because they've got to have social distancing. So I think we've seen what's going to happen probably here. So there is that. However, the productions are looking at different systems as well. So one of the conversations we had right at the beginning was that maybe there's a different model in terms of certain groups can work. So for example, the accounts. They've said that the accounts department are and have been working from home during the crisis. Before they were required to come into the studio or into the production base and work from there. So there's certain grades probably that they can work more remotely, and they're also talking about whether they can do systems like split shifts, so they can still get some of the work done, but in a different way, a different working pattern. So they are exploring all the different options, but I think initially it's going to be a very slow start in terms of productions getting back, and it's going to be a very reduced crew, and I don't think we're going to see anything like we did before this pandemic for quite some time, because the lockdown isn't going to be released overnight. There's different steps to it, so I think it's slowly relaxed. That's when we see the crew levels probably going up slightly.
Thanks, Spencer. Just a couple of comments in the chat about whether we picked up your questions. Stuart is trying to amalgamate questions as much as possible, and we're asking for no more questions to be submitted from here on in, but we'll try and get through as many that are there as possible. We do have the ability to go over slightly, but only slightly, because I know people have got other meetings to get to. Friday evening and more meetings to get to. Stuart, next one, please.
No worries. Thank you very much, Jay. I wouldn't worry. There's definitely a good hour or so left of questions here. Now I'm going to get on to a bunch that are about PPE and additional kit and the disinfecting of kit. So bear with me with this one. One anonymous attendee asked, what would the rules be on face masks and PPE in general? And another asks, who would be responsible for supplying and should cover the cost of any extra kit, not just limited to PPE, but in the case of hair and makeup, for instance, extra brushes, product bottles, or equally, another anonymous attendee, if a prep crew member has a large kit not easily transported, can production be asked to provide duplicate kit items so they've got the same access to the same equipment whilst at the office and whilst at home, for instance, if they're working from home?
Okay, the PPE, who decides on the rules on PPE? Obviously, we have to be led by government in what they're suggesting, and then it will be into production to set their safe working protocols. We would hope that the government guidelines are a minimum level. Obviously, we have each workspace on set is different, so we have to take that as the starting point. There's been some discussion about whether everyone should wear masks or not. Obviously, it depends on the type of mask, getting the mask fitted properly, replacing the mask regularly as needs be. Also, when you talk about gloves, protective gloves are only of any use if you're still not touching your face, because even if you're wearing gloves, you could pick up the infection on a glove, and then if you touch your face, you're still transmitting it. Same with touching masks. So there's still lots of unanswered questions. I really do wish we had some clearer guidance from government on this, but as we don't, it'll be putting safe production working protocols together for each production. And one of the things that's being recommended is much better use of information in educating people on the correct and appropriate use of PPE. Appropriate is the key word here. If it's needed, it should be provided by production for you to be able to use on set. Or if the production protocol says so, it says it's to be used, it should be provided for you, and you should be inducted on how best to use it. Then the other question was about kit, additional items that you might need to cover these. Again, I'm hoping to outline here, Spencer, to say that we would hope that no individual will be left out of pocket by trying to adhere to safety guidelines that are required by a production. You want to say anything, Spencer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's key to it, really. That we want to make sure that no one is absolutely out of pocket as a result of this, and the productions aren't taking advantage of the situation. Particularly, like we said about it's going to be going back slowly, so there's going to be more labour available for them to choose. So I don't want them to take advantage of that particular situation and use it as an opportunity for them to say to individuals that they have to supply extra kit and actually pay for that. So that is key to it as well, and that can form part of these conditions that we're going to be talking about possibly next week. And certainly, I don't think with the the major motion pictures or the high-end TV, that's going to be a big factor. But it might be for the lower budgets, because I'm certainly hearing from the lower budget productions that in terms of the cost, because there will be additional cost in terms of implementing some of these practices, the cost they're seriously concerned about. So if they're seriously concerned about the cost already in terms of implementing some of the practices, then I'm sure there'll be certain circumstances where they will be asking crew members to do certain things that will put the burden back on them. So where they're choosing to do that, it comes back to, I'd say to everyone, that they should alert the union to that, and then we can actually pick it up with the production. Because certainly we don't want to see anyone, out of pocket as a result of this, particularly if it's about making you safe.
Thank you, and I hope that covers. I mean, if you're in a specific situation where you've got a large kit and you're being asked to work both from home and on set and transporting that, or the worries of moving from one environment to another, then it's definitely a question to talk to production about at the time of booking. But the same thing applies. We wouldn't expect anyone to be out of pocket because they're doing things which are required by safe working protocols under COVID-19. Stuart, next one, please.
Okay, this spins off from that with regards to cleaning and time allowed between cleans for quarantine, and this answers questions from Anna Shishon, Nick Toulon, and Toby Harris. So, for instance, in the case of makeup, would that mean a makeup artist would have to come in 72 hours before they start work? Nick asked, would there be a decontamination area for incoming or outgoing kit? equally, those that own kit would have to quarantine for 72 hours before it can be used again. And should that be paid for? And Toby raises the point of, with regards to filming on location, would a cleaning crew have to go in before that in that 72 hours?
Okay, so the 72-hour thing is to do if you have an item that is a hard surface and you think it's been infected and you don't do any cleaning to it, you can leave it for 72 hours, and the current thinking is that they would no longer hold an infection. If the items are being cleaned, the 72 hours doesn't apply, because you can clean it and you will have removed any danger of infection. So it's about managing your equipment and workflow as you need to. There should be more time allowed for disinfection and cleaning within a production schedule, whether that be that on a pre-light day, be that on at the start of a day, however that needs to be worked out. That we don't think it should be extending anybody's working day or working hours. So we certainly don't think that this should end up in a situation where you're getting into more prep and wrap time because you've got to adhere to these processes. But then that's straying into the T&C's section, which we're looking for. Bectu are holding the call on next week. And locations cleaning, it needs to be done on a sort of case by case basis. You have to think about whether is the location normally occupied. Has there been any occupation? Has there been anyone in the location in the previous 72 hours, let's say? Does anyone live there? Do they need to do they need to move out? If nominally, we would recommend that a cleaning crew go into a location, but it would all depend on the location. It obviously needs to be made safe again for whoever's reoccupying that location at the end of its time. So it really needs to be looked at on a location by location basis, but it's certainly something that should be considered. Next one, please, Stuart.
Okay, I think I'll deal next with the raft of questions on extra time and the extending of production schedules. This has been informed by questions from Edgar Dubrovsky.
We'll get you back on in this one, Jay.
Caroline O'Reilly, Colin Nicholson, Anonymous, and Anita Gupta. So if I go following, Colin says, following on from what Jay has just said about extra days on a schedule, should we also be policing hours on the day and weekend, as the more tired you are, the weaker your immune system? And Caroline would add to that, because of scheduling lower daily page counts, does that mean we're in danger of the 6-day week or 11-day fortnight coming back?
Do you want me to answer some of those?
Yeah, do you want to take that, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, you might have to correct me on what's in the actual document, because you're way more over it than I am. But as far as in the document, as far as ADs are concerned, it does have a section that says that we should be aware of the extra time and schedule that in when we're doing the initial schedule. And then the discussion should then carry on to HODs and production to make sure production are aware of the extra time that we're having to put in because of what is being asked for and what we're needing to allow extra time for. What was the other thing, Stu? There was, sorry, mate.
Whether the 6-day week might come back.
Oh, 6-day week. Now that's interesting in as far as I was speaking to another producer yesterday, and they were saying, and they were kind of saying that they have to, they're not prepared to work crews past a certain amount of hours, and they were saying that what they were interested in, I think what we tend to agree with, is that a 10-hour working day should be stipulated, and any extended overtime should be severely looked at because of crew getting tired, and that leading to stress levels and possible likelihood of being infected due to being too tired. That would, as we were talking through it, because of the amount of hours that you have to work and what you need to lay into, that probably means that actually you'll be on camera time down to 8 hours, because you're probably adding at least 2 hours every day in the working process. So what they were saying is, yes, there may well be, it's not in any of our guidelines at all, but there is a possibility that producers may be looking at working 6-day weeks to be able to get back that time. Otherwise, they're looking at extending their shoots by, as I said, over a 5-week period, they're probably extending their shoot by an extra week and a half. So what would normally be a 5-week shoot would end up being a 6 to 6.5 week shoot. That isn't, as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty 100% sure that isn't laid down in any of our guidelines at all, and is something we would be recommending doesn't happen for a 6-day week, because equally you're then tiring out the crew. But it is something that I know some people are thinking about, and particularly America are thinking about introducing that. Other than that, I mean, I think we just need to be very aware of, you know, keeping the working hours down now, because it's a definite health and safety risk, particularly with COVID, because you get run down, you won't, you know, feel more susceptible.
Thanks, Jay.
Is there anything else? I'm not sure there's anything else.
I think that covered it. I mean, just to echo that as well, I think we're very clear, and it needs to be borne in mind in all of this when we're thinking about the practicals, that actually there's going to be a huge amount of additional sort of stress involved in this, and additional mental pressure involved in managing all of this for all of us, and that needs to be taken into account at every stage of the production, and so time needs to be allowed, and things need to slow down, and we need to give ourselves that time to be able to, you know, to do things safely, which maybe one of the good things that comes out of this in terms of how we work, but it does need to be borne in mind, and we don't feel that nothing in the recommended guidelines should add, should cause any kind of mental duress on, you know, or physical duress on any crew. So let's go ahead. So we've got about 40 odd questions left, so we probably might not get to all of them, but hopefully they'll be clumped together, eh, Stuart?
Yes, well, most definitely. I'm doing my best. It's the second part, the extra time questions, comes to the fact of the last minute changes. Is this a good time to tackle production companies about scripts being near ready before hiring crew, so there aren't any last minute changes, more with reference to how wider industry practice has seemed to give us late scripts, and it makes prep very chaotic. Along with COVID, last minute changes will become very difficult to facilitate.
I think it's a very valid point, and it is mentioned in our document, and I think it should be brought up at the meeting next week as well, in terms of terms and conditions, because you need more time to be able to properly plan everything. I think the point that's been made in the document is that scripts delivered with enough time to prepare them properly before a shoot will mean that we'll be able to think in more detail about what's required, and actually through clever scheduling, hopefully you might be able to mitigate some of the additional costs that production are going to have to face through this process. So it's going to be beneficial for them to get the scripts to everyone sooner. Did you want to add something on that, Jay or Spencer?
Yeah, there was just from AD's point of view, there was, again, I've been having a lot of talks with other producers in other countries, but one of the points that came up that seemed to be in general agreement was the more increased use of storyboarding and storyboarding artists in the pre-production, so that everybody really is absolutely aware of what needs to be covered, so that when you actually get to set, in much the same way as people may do in or do in commercials, pretty much every scene has been storyboarded, so that there has been a full discussion about what lenses we're using, how we're actually shooting it, how we're actually going about, and what equipment we're going to need for each scene. So all of that more in-depth work has been done in pre-production, which quite often isn't done, and is more at the whim, where somebody has to run off to a truck to get a particular bit of kit out, or has changing particular lenses. They were asking and saying it would be a very good idea if that's something that we introduce more, which allows you more pre-production time, more groundwork, more work done on the actual total planning of every shoot, so that there is less of the organic process that goes on a film set, so that we actually know exactly what the director wants before we actually turn up on the day. So just something interesting to bear in mind when you're in pre-production.
Crazy idea, Jay, knowing what the director wants before we start. I mean,
well,
where did you get that idea from? All right, Stuart, next question, please.
In prep, who'd have thought?
Come on.
Okay, I'm going to move. I'm just going to use that as an opportunity to answer short questions from Lainey Shortall and John Prentice. Lainey asked, realistically is it likely that a decent amount of productions will start filming again across the UK? And John asks for any specific advice for commercials or short form, because of how usually he'd be on multiple jobs per week with totally different crews. And as a lighting technician, he's worried his risk could be increased. Yeah, so in terms of decent workload coming back, we don't really know. Some productions, we're hearing of some productions coming back up. Some of the health and safety providers should have their sort of, their crew briefing section, kind of crew briefing videos and things ready by mid-June, they're saying. More than that, I don't really know. I can't really tell you at the moment. Commercials are coming back online, are starting to come back online. And the thing of moving between different productions is going to be an issue. And it's going to mean that we're just going to have to be, in every day of working, we're going to have to be really careful about how we're working and the distancing factors. Obviously, we haven't touched on the idea of the health questionnaire, the COVID-19 health questionnaire, which the APA is recommending that everyone get signed, and I think that will become a thing across the industry that will be asked to sign those at the start of every job. Obviously, you can only fill that out to the best of your knowledge. We'll ask whether you've been in contact with everyone, whether you have had symptoms in such and such a time, or whether you've been in contact with anyone or you live with anyone who has symptoms. But you can only ask to the best of your knowledge. There's no way of guaranteeing that it's not passed on. So the measures on set will need to be followed to make sure we keep all of each other safe, ourselves and everyone we're working with. For those moving between productions on a sort of day-to-day basis, we just need to make sure that the practices put in place are adhered to and that everyone's looking after themselves. And that's one of the reasons why having a COVID supervisor on every set is vital. Stu, next question, please. Okay, I might add to that with Harriet Creighton, Peter Kosminski's, I'm so sorry, their questions about crowd scenes and essays. Harriet mentions that essays would have to be reduced for filming, and Peter says he's working on a show that has large crowd scenes, fights, a riot. Very hard to see how this can be done with any kind of social distancing, but he'd welcome your view. Yeah, unfortunately, I tend to agree with you. At the moment, where we are large crowd scenes and that kind of fights and riot scenes, it's very difficult to see how we'd be able to film that in the current climate. So one of the suggestions is if you're on a longer production where there are those crowd scenes, that they be scheduled later on in the production, with the view to that restrictions may get further lifted and we may have the ability to shoot those at a later stage. But it is very hard. It is very hard to know how that's going to work, and obviously everything needs to be thought about in terms of social distancing. At the current time, Jay, you've popped up again.
No, just there was again. So talking through other people about how to work these scenes. There was we were talking about how we did cover crowd scenes, and with the segregation of essays. Obviously, we're then working into a situation where it comes into post-production, but the suggestion was you can get around some of those things by just multiple passes and the same sort of thing as you would do with a motion control type situation. But again, it's time, and it's something that if you are going to be taking or finding an approach to that, just you need to bear in mind, especially as the first, the amount of time that those kind of things will take. There is no easy way around it, as you were saying. Thank you. Did we cover both parts of that question, Stuart? We did, yes, we did. Great, thank you. Onwards. Okay, then I'm going to pose a handful of questions about where either distancing isn't really possible, and also the transfer of objects, kit, etc., between departments. Feeding into this are a number of anonymous attendees and John Young. So I will deal with, would common sense be used when considering social distancing, like footing ladders, moving heavy equipment, and also, for instance, in terms of a hair and makeup perspective from an anonymous attendee, it would be impossible, particularly in period productions, using
wigs, etc., passing from one person to another?
Yeah. Again, for the hair and makeup question, I would refer you to our document, which has a lot of work in it by the hair and makeup branch. They've been incredibly active. So if you have any specific concerns, or you want to talk to them about anything, then do get in touch with them. I'll try and dig out their email address that they've offered up for these meetings. But they're really thinking through everything in very granular terms, and they've got a 20-point process protocol that they're publishing around all the documents at the moment. John, was it John's question at the beginning in terms of safe working process? Yes, absolutely. Common sense does need to be used. Common sense needs to be used, and it may be that you need to take, you'll need to take enhanced measures to make sure that you are, keeping yourself safe and your colleagues safe. And it may be if there's if you're in a situation where there's a lot of working which needs to be two people moving stuff, that you as a two-person cohort exist slightly outside of your normal department, so that only those two people are moving things that require two people, so that you've got there's less danger of passing infection on between other people on the set. All of those workflows need to be thought through and properly risk assessed in the light of all this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Expanding on the makeup point, anonymous attendee asks, is it reasonable to ask an actress to learn to do a specialist makeup technique, even with professional advice like bruises, so that any remaining shots to complete a feature could be filmed in an isolated remote location with just the director or a camera op?
I wonder what the focus of the question is, whether she's been asked and wonders whether she's been asked unreasonably, or whether we think it's reasonable. I'm not sure. I think obviously it might be a useful skill to attain, but I would talk to talk to the head of makeup if you're in a situation like that. Maybe you're part way through filming or something like that comes up. I would talk to your makeup department and see how they feel about it, because it may be that they would rather employ their protocols to get you in and for them to see you directly rather than have you do it themselves. So that would be my advice. Defer to the department head.
Okay, and then I've got really one more point on this, which was a question from an anonymous attendee about about the effect of shrinking the entire industry and putting pressure on people, but coming up with the suggestion of, for jobs that span more than one department, like a standby chippy or a rigger who helps out the art department, lighting, grips or green teams, would that mean that possibly double might have to be hired to avoid cross-contamination?
Yes, very possibly, and that crewing level, and however the production is organised on what their cohorts cohorting plan is. Yes, you may well need to make sure that you've got more people. This is what I was saying. Less people on set is an easy thing to point at because you have less chance of individual transmission, but you might need more people in order to actually be able to continue working safely.
True. Okay then, two anonymous attendees, mostly talking about hazardous and dangerous environments, saying circa 2011 a contract included a disclaimer saying that they were made aware of asbestos being on set and nobody had said a word about it until then. What's to stop production sending crew into unsanitized locations for weeks and then giving you a contract? And also, could this be an opportunity to completely ban hazardous chemicals from the film industry, as COVID-19 is a respiratory issue? Mostly foam and froth packs used in construction.
So the second part of that, I'll throw over to Spencer about the hazardous materials. I mean, the first issue, I mean, what rogue companies flouting the rules and telling you something's been done when it hasn't, we would hope it wouldn't come to that in this situation, but it is always possible. I think contact the union, get in touch with the union, talk to the COVID health and safety supervisor on that production, talk to the health and safety officer on that production if you've got any concerns, and ask to see proof that the location's being cleaned before you go in there. If that from your department's perspective, is something that you think you require before starting work. I mean, I think that's an entirely reasonable request to see proof of cleaning before you start work in a location. Spencer, could you take the second part of that question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. First of all, it's probably a bit worrying, really, if you're being asked, if you were asked to waive your rights in terms of going to a stage where there was asbestos, where they'd identified there was asbestos. So that's a bit worrying if production's choosing to do that. If in terms of the chemicals and about should we seek a ban across the industry in terms of use of chemicals, it depends. It depends. I can't really give you a sweeping answer to that because there are certain circumstances where if they're used properly and safely, they're appropriate. Where they're not, that's where we've got issues. And we do know that in certain, in the construction side of it, in particular, the plasterers were raised about the use of foam, and we've got an issue in terms of productions using that excessively and not in with the manufacturer's guidance. So there are particular issues like that where we could seek to say to the productions in these particular circumstances they should revise how they actually use those materials. But I wouldn't want to say across the board we'd seek a blanket ban on all chemicals because we'd have to look at that case by case. But certainly there are certain circumstances I've just mentioned where we could seek to enhance our message that we're already sending on things like the foam. So we could do things like that. So that might be something that we can look at.
Thank you, Spencer. Next question then, please, Stuart.
Okay, I'm going to pose two questions from Tom White and Christopher Evans that are both talking about studio and broadcaster COVID-19 guidelines, how they fit into BECTU. Tom says he's on a Netflix show currently and expecting to receive their own COVID-19 guidelines soon. Have there been any comms or consultations with studios about a unified COVID-19 code of practice? And what is the suggested procedure for any discrepancies between both codes? And similarly from Christopher, if BBC and ITV TV soaps are going to be going back to work soon, are they working on their own guidelines or will they be looking to us for this?
Okay, so there is, in terms of the unified code, that's what the BFC have been trying to have been working on. That's what the consultation with the British Film Commission's Recovery Group has been dealing with, and Netflix, Warner's, some of the major producers, BECTU, PACT, BFI, and other stakeholders have been part of that. So that's going to go to HSE and governmental level. The idea being, as I understand it, that will be the benchmark for all those productions to adhere to. So once that's published, if there's any discrepancy between what your production is offering and what's on the benchmark, then that should be a clear point of a clear point of discussion to go to the higher standard. Our document that we're putting out there is a resource to back all of that up. It's a document of best practice, we hope, which will be constantly updated to reflect the situation. So if you have any questions about the code of practice that an individual production has put together, and they all will put together their own protocols, if you any questions about that, then do refer back to the BECTU document. And if you think something is lacking, then you have to raise it with the producer. And if you need backup, then I'm sure BECTU will back you up on any points that are contentious.
Stuart, do you mind if I just cover, because we've got quite a few people who are asking about the waivers. So
I am going to get to that. That's in a question. Let's deal with that next. Let's deal with that next, Joe, unless you have anything to add.
No, that's fine. What I will say, I know it's 5 to 5, guys. We are able to go a little bit longer. Yeah, I hear you all say. I think we'll like to try and do about another 20 minutes Q&A, and then we'll start to wrap up. So if you can stay with us, that's great. So yeah, go on, waivers then, Stu. What's the question?
So yes, it's just Jamie. So Jamie Harcourt asks, will BECTU officially advise against signing waivers? And then an anonymous attendee asks, could production cover these terms from the joint BSc BECTU document of ultimate health responsibility for health and safety of the crew lies with the employer, and that needs to be made explicit. All crew members need to know that should they fall ill or have to be sent home to isolate, they will be furloughed by the production with full pay until fully recovered.
Okay, so on the last point first, that's definitely for the meeting on Tuesday. Please, whoever wrote that question, sorry, on Monday, Monday next week, the T&C's meeting, bring that to that meeting, please. That's it's not something that we're covering in the Safe Working Practice document. Although personally, I agree with you. Yes, absolutely, that should be the case. The waivers. I mean, you can't, there's a difference. I don't know if you're talking about a waiver against the health questionnaire. The waiver has no legal standing in the UK. You can't waive your rights to being protected on set, and the ultimate responsibility for the health and safety in the working environment lies with the producer. However, everyone is also responsible for their own health and safety, and as an HOD, that of your department. So there is different levels of health and safety responsibility. Anything you want to add there, Spencer?
No, but it's an important point, actually, particularly if it's come up on the questions a few times in terms of the waivers, because the thing is we need to, make sure that, we combat that quite early, because the thing is, if it does encroach in terms of, health and safety, we want to make sure that, productions are aware of their responsibilities, because if they're trying to say that they can then shift their responsibility onto the crew, then I think we've got a bigger issue in terms of, what they think their responsibilities are. So if people are being told that that is what the approach that productions are going to take, and if they've got evidence of that, they should certainly send it through, because it's never factored in any of the conversations that we've had, in regards to the, the BFC document, the British Film, Commission document. All the other negotiations in terms of the broadcasters, they've never raised it in terms of the documentation that certainly I've seen. And there's a further meeting in terms of there's a task force for, smaller indies, and certainly it's never been raised there. So it's slightly worrying if it is in relation to health and safety. So if that is the case, then they should certainly, if you've got written evidence of that, then send it through. If you've just got, hearsay, but still let us know, because we need to, be aware of it, and we can try and tackle it if it's happening on a particular production. But certainly we'll want to stamp on it as hard and as quick as we can if it is in regards to health and safety.
Thanks, Spencer. Let's power on through, Stu. 15 minutes to see how many we can get through.
Okay, pressure's on. In that case, anonymous attendee asking, as a spin-off of that, what would be the guidance on set of sending someone home into self-isolation? Would it have to be a cough or more than that?
Government guidelines is what you come into here. The government has published what they say is our symptoms, which include a new repetitive cough, I believe, and a temperature over 37.8 degrees. So that's all going to have to be, that has to go back to what the government is saying at the particular time. Okay,
perfect. I'll field this one from Tim Mannion now. Has anybody more, so to our officials, has anybody at BECTU investigated the possibility of having on-set private healthcare rapid testing facilities for productions, using the example that Emirates Airlines have managed to implement a facility at Dubai Airport of pinprick blood tests on all its passengers that can give results in 10 minutes? If this sort of facility could be available for cast on a daily basis at cost of production, this could surely help with cast having to act in close contact. Is this feasible for the industry?
It's not something that I have heard is available in this country yet. I hadn't heard about the Emirates situation, that they've got that pinprick test. I know that the tests that have been talked about in this country that operate in a similar way have all been found to be unreliable by Public Health England. I would hazard to say that at the moment we don't know it, so we don't know. So until that facility became available in this country, and it was signed off, and it was available in enough capacity, and the cost was known, I don't think we can answer that question.
Okay, I'm going to move on to questions from Adam Warner and Mark Goddard with regards insurance. Adam says, how can productions restart with the absence of insurance, which I would hazard as a foregone conclusion? And then Mark says, with regard to insurance, How would this work with cast if they became ill, because production could completely come to a halt dependent on their part?
Spencer, over to you on that one, on the insurance question.
So productions will have insurance. It just won't have. It just have an exclusion in terms of the pandemic, and that's the same for virtually every single employer, probably across the globe, because the insurers just aren't picking up in terms of the liability with anything related to the pandemic. So we're not on our own in terms of this industry or even this country. It's a global issue. So the productions will have insurance. They have to have, as a legal requirement, employers' liability insurance. So you are insured if you're, even if you're a PAYE, freelancer, you're insured by the production. It just won't cover this particular circumstances. So the productions, as I said, previously, the bigger studio productions will be able to afford to take the risk in terms of if one of the principal artists becomes ill, they'll be able to absorb that in terms of stopping. Maybe they have to take a hiatus or whatever it might be. It's the smaller productions they're concerned about in terms of stopping. So if the breaks have to go on for the industry, so whether the cast become ill, or whether the pandemic flares up again, and then we close down the industry again. So they're the ones that are concerned about those particular circumstances and what they do in those situations. But they will have insurance. It just won't include, unfortunately, it won't include this COVID-19.
Okay, thanks, Spencer. Stuart, onwards.
Okay, one quick one from John Weeks. Will advice for any roles primarily office or desk-based, i.e. post-production, be to work from home if possible?
Have a look at the document. Post-production they added a section to that yesterday. So there's a post-production section on there. I'm afraid I can't remember the exact answer to your question. I believe where possible, there is, if possible, there's certainly a push towards having people work remotely.
Okay, and with regards to another quick one from an anonymous attendee, is there guidelines for construction?
There's some mention of constructions. There's not a specific construction page. There's some mention on art department. If construction branch want to add anything to the document and to put their feedback in there, and I know there was a bit more in the BFC document, and we could certainly use that as a starting point. Then please do so, and we're happy to add that to the document as soon as you've got some wording for us.
Jay, can I come in on that? There is a 9:30 a.m. meeting for all construction department members on Monday with Spencer and I. We know that the rigging department have drafted up their own list, as well as Russ Sargent from the carpenters branch has also been very much involved with it. So yeah, all that information will be in the bulk email that was sent out today. So we really do encourage all construction department workers to come to that meeting on 9:30 a.m. on Monday morning.
Great, thank you. And yeah, riggers and the carpenters have been very involved in the BFC consultation, and that's been happening at the same time as this document rewrites. So some branches, there's work ongoing. There's still work going on at the moment. It was just felt important to get this document out into the public sphere as it is, and update as we go. So next, please, Stuart.
Okay, an anonymous attendee says, regarding productions you choose to hire local crew only, i.e. there's no accommodation as part of the crew deal, where would crew members stand on this? Would crew be expected to find temporary accommodation or lodging themselves with the duration of the job as we did pre-COVID, or would this come under duty of care from production to house crew accordingly?
I don't know. There's mention in the BFC document about avoiding putting crew up in overnight accommodation, in temporary accommodation, due to the sort of the cleaning issues involved in that. But with that comes a whole raft of issues in terms of how far you're travelling for work, whether that extends your working day, whether it's safe to have you travelling for that time. Again, it's slightly for the terms and conditions meeting on Monday afternoon, so come along to that to discuss. But that needs to be addressed. It's not clear yet. We don't have any production guidance on that.
Okay, I'll move on to a two-pronged question from one anonymous attendee and one from Sean Smith. I believe we covered the first one about trying to have a contractual guarantee in the engagement contract that anyone developing symptoms will be paid for the 14 days of required isolation.
That will come up on the meeting on Monday to be discussed. That's not in this document here.
And Sean Smith said, do you think the union could produce a guideline rate card for days spent in quarantine?
Again, for the Monday afternoon meeting, that's something to bring up in there, I think. But I'm sure it's something the union could look into, right? Yeah, Spencer's nodding. Small amounts. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. You froze a little bit there on there, Jay. So, but yeah, it's we can discuss that. Yeah, we can discuss that on Monday. So we're going to talk about the full range in terms of what protection people need to. So whether it's about rates, whether it's about certain conditions, whatever it might be, we can have that. But it has to be related in terms of this particular situation. It's not the broader picture in terms of the long-term objectives that the union wants to achieve about impact that might have on terms and conditions. So that meeting isn't in Monday between 2 and 4, and we just encourage everyone to attend and make sure that they have their input.
Cool. Thanks, Spencer. Next one then, please, Stuart.
Okay, I'd like to do one from an anonymous attendee saying in the past it's notable that on lower budget productions, corners are cut in health and safety policy. With COVID-19 health and safety, where the repercussions are now more serious, the disparity with big budget productions may be exposed. How does Bectu intend to deal with this apart, other than offer the anonymous service that we've talked about? Could separate negotiate guidelines be issued for low budgets?
Spencer, I'll let you take that one, please.
Yeah, so the conditions meeting we're going to have on Monday can touch on this, because I think the most vulnerable part of the industry is going to be the lower budget sector. They're the ones that I think that are going to probably resist some of the changes because they are going to be looking at it in terms of the budget and the costs associated with that. So I think that needs to factor in the terms and conditions discussion that we have on Monday. We are trying to talk to the lower budgets. I think they're going to probably be slower in terms, some of them anyway, are going to be slower in terms of getting off the ground. So some of the meetings that I've certainly been involved in, they've talked about a broad range of particular issues. So rather than just health and safety, they've got a much broader spectrum in terms of issues that they need to square off before they can actually start production again. They are worried about their insurance because they don't want to start and then find out the pandemic spikes again and they have to stop. They're worried about, all sorts of other issues about cast availability and those sorts of things, locations and all those sorts of things really that makes a lower budget production much more fragile. So we will be discussing it on Monday and we can factor those things in, and we will be circulating that as widely as possible and saying that is the union's position. I think as much as we can, we're going to have to try and monitor it and make sure that any intelligence we get, that we respond to that. So it will be critical that people do flag these things, because sometimes what tends to happen is people flag things and it's after the situation has actually happened and we can't unpick problems. So I'll just encourage everyone, if they are aware of productions that might be beginning and they're not ready and they haven't got the budget, then flag that to the union immediately. Thanks,
Spencer. Come on then, Stuart, let's try and get through 2 or 3 more.
Right, 5 minutes. From anonymous attendee in Lewis Barron, dealing with questions on crew health and hours. Lewis saying, will the back to work guidelines include recommendations on mental health for production and shooting crew, as it feels more important in these tough times? And our anonymous attendee asks, no doubt production may try to stretch the current length of working days and how many days are in that week to make up time due to delays that could factor from putting these guidelines in place.
Jay, we've covered a little bit of that. Jay talked about the length of the working day. Mental health is an important issue. I touched on it briefly earlier, but I mean, I think there is mental health first aid training available through Bectu, which is very valuable. very valuable thing, and I would, I'd urge anyone who's interested in that field to take that on. But it is very, very important, and we need to be looking out for our crew, not only for physical health, but also for mental health throughout this process. And that's all part of not exposing anyone to additional duress and trying to shoot the same amount in the same amount of time as we were before this crisis. Everything needs to slow down, give everyone a chance to catch up. Next one, please, Stuart.
Okay, I'd like to pose Ty Hack's question. This is very specific. Should we advise productions that because of COVID-19, these guidelines, the use of low loaders and A-frames could be out of question for the time being, considering there are confined space in the crew compartment and the use of multiple lead follow vehicles? They're currently planning a shoot with multiple driving scenes. Any recommendations would be helpful.
I would go to the specialist supplier, be it Vickers or whoever's doing all the vehicle work, and start talking and get in there now. Talk to them about their protocols and how their protocols are evolving in this situation. Because yeah, you're right. A low loader with a 7 capacity rear cab can probably now only be a 2, maybe 3 capacity rear cab. So, do they put one extra person down on the flatbed? Can you make it work with, remote operated equipment, less people on there? Obviously, the follow vehicles issue is an issue. So all of that needs to be risk assessed on the basis of how it's going to be run safely. Like I say, you can't put 16 people in a minibus at the moment. It's just not practical. Speak to the vehicle supplier. Get onto them now and find out what they would suggest. They're the experts in that field. Yes, Stu.
Okay.
2 more.
This is going to have to be the last one, isn't it?
Go on.
104 questions. Wow. Okay. I'm going to leave this one. Should the timing of the risk assessment doc delivery to crew or potential crew be shifted now, as they would prefer to see one before deciding to take the job or not, and not the day before the actual shoot? Can this be added to the master document and enforced?
Terms and conditions question for Monday. I think there'll probably be issues in there involved with confidentiality and NDAs, and you might need to sign something before you're allowed to look at the document. I don't know. That's going to be a production by production basis. I agree. Yes, as soon as you can see it, as early as you can see it, would be the best way. But that should go into the Monday afternoon session, I think. Go on, Stu. Let's see if we can get one more.
Okay, let's see if we can get one more. And I will remind people, I'll pop it in the chat box as well, that if you have any questions that I'm sorry we didn't get round to today, I believe that we've either covered most of them or questions like them. The AD branch email address has gone in the box for those questions. So let's look at Luis Fernando Aguiar Jardim's question. One of the most tricky moments for the AD department could be sign in, sign out of SAs, and keeping distance during processes and handling car stunts, costume makeup. How could we deal with that, given the time that we might have to allow to do things on giant days? It could take absolutely forever to get people through.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true. It's an ongoing conversation depending on what exactly the task is. It may be now, if you think about cohort working, that you'll need to be allocated to work within cohort with another department or members of another department, rather than being in cohort with other ADs, depending on the task. Digital sign-in processes, perhaps. It's a big topic. It's a big question, and it's not one that I'm going to be able to sufficiently answer here. Jay, do you want to jump in with anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the fact that we were obviously saying that, working large crowds and large crowd scenes and any complicated scenes need to be scheduled as far down the schedule as we can, so we've got more chance of having the safety procedures in place. There's also the fact that this is one prime example where actually the use of well-planned use of dailies and extra crew would be necessary, where you would then have an AD branch that would be working. You'd get more members of an AD branch in that would then be working solely with the, so as you were saying, with the cohort that is wardrobe and makeup, so that would become a completely separate unit that deal just with the background and any complicated car situations. So in those situations, that is a point where you would be getting in more crew, but they would be isolated off to their own areas. So that's the one way around that we've been thinking about, trying to get those kind of things working. Is actually one of the few areas where you'd actually talk to production, or the first AD would be responsible for talking to the production and saying, for this particular day, because of what we need to achieve in the day, we will actually have to bring in more people than we would normally have, because they have to work in a totally separate cohort situation. So
thanks, Jay. Stu, I'm going to just jump in. I can see there's about 10 questions on the Q&A, and just a couple of quick one-word answers on some of these. So
I'll go through.
Fine. Anonymous attendee says about in the doc it says first AD is in pod 2. Yeah, that's work in progress. All of that needs to be worked out. I think it was just put in there as an example. More likely, first ADs will need to be in pod 1, but it's whether they can be at a monitor situation with the director instead to be continued. If the BECTU document is not being made mandatory by the government, how can it be enforced? The BECTU document itself is best practice guidelines. Each production is going to have to put their own together. What I would say is we were very encouraged by talking to a lot of producers in the commercial sector over the last few days. Is everyone really does understand the importance of this, of getting this right, and of looking after everyone. A good producer will look after their crew. There was a question about soaps getting back. There is a TV production document doing the rounds at the moment from BBC, ITV, S4. S4C. Have a look at that. That will be available somewhere. I don't have it to hand to share in the link, but email channel2grapevine@gmail.com if you want to get your hands on a copy. There's a question about dedicated COVID-19 and whether trainees are going to end up cleaning things. No, we would want it to be a dedicated COVID-19 supervisor supervising a cleaning team. We're not expecting it to be runners doing that. I think that would be very wrong. And note and sharing of equipment. If equipment does need to be shared between departments, it will obviously there will need to be protocols in place for disinfecting before you lend it to another department, and for it to be disinfected before it comes back. All that stuff needs to be worked out, because sometimes you do have to share equipment. But there is a recommendation that all tools, all hands tools particularly, and personal equipment is not shared unless absolutely necessary, so that one person remains responsible for it. And I think that pretty much gets us through our question list.
Actually, there's one burning that.
Go on, one more.
It's very
short.
It's short, but it's crucial. Mattia Capassa is saying it depends on this, depending completely on personal choice. But what if someone lives with a vulnerable person under the government COVID-19 guidelines? Would they be recommended not to return to work despite as much safety measure and guidance being put in place as possible?
That's a very hard question. I don't think it would have to. It depends how your living arrangements are set up. I have a friend and colleague who has a serious underlying condition. He's having to self-isolate from the rest of his family. That is sometimes the case. So it's how you can manage your accommodation situation to make sure that you're not feeling that you're putting yourself or members of your family at risk. Something like that, I think, has to come down to a personal perspective. Listen, I know it's 5:20. Thank you for sticking with us. Numbers are dropping slightly. Everyone's got bored of my voice. But I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thanks for your questions. It's been really useful. I just want to say one last thing before people go. The work that's been put into this document has been done by probably 40 or 50 people who are crew, who are part of branches, who are people who normally we see on set, working on set day to day. From I'm not going to mention the branches because I'll forget someone and I'll get in trouble. But all of the reps who've helped us with this document have put in an enormous amount of work. If you feel strongly about this and you want to get involved, contact your branch, write something, get it in, because you guys are the experts. You know what you want to put in this document, and you'll have ideas about how we can move forward. If everyone who joined the call today becomes an active member of this branch, the union will become stronger. So thank you, and let's use this time when we're not doing so much of the normal day-to-day work to make all of our working lives that bit better. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll hand over for any final closing comments for Spencer and Paul, and say thank you very much for joining us today.
Can I pop up first and just echo what Jay has said? This is an example of the sort of work that can be done with active involvement in the various branches of BECTU. If they're ever needed to give anybody a reason to join the union apart from the basic, the benefits of public liability insurance discounts and that, it's this: you get a voice in shaping the future of your industry. And also I'd like to express special thanks once again to Jordan Cottress and James Metcalf for how they've helped Jay from the AD branch side of things in compiling the various things that those 40 or 50 people have sent in. Thank you very much.
Well said. I just want to echo that as well, and also just to say I'd like to take full credit for all of the documents, but I can't. I have to say that compiled by
that's mine.
Lots of other people. So well done, and like Jay said, in terms of the contributions, they've been absolutely fantastic. And I think when you've looked at, and I've got quite a good helicopter view in terms of some of the other contributions that are coming in for other organisations, and we are in the Premier League when it comes to our contribution. You can actually see the difference in terms of the level of detail and the information that we're providing, in contrast to some of the other contributions. So we should all be proud in terms of the work we're doing, and it's it is fantastic. And I have to say, the employers, the studios and the streamers have been phenomenally impressed in terms of the quality of the work that's going on. So I have to say, congratulations to everyone who's been involved in that, but in particularly to the AD's branch and Jay, who's been leading on it. So well done. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jay.
Big round of applause for Jay.
Okay, thanks everyone. Paul, do you want to say a quick little thing?
Just one last thing. We've mentioned on the call today that we are going to be meeting early next week to discuss issues around terms and conditions. This is a meeting that your branches have been invited to, and your branch reps will be going to. So if you have anything that you want adding into that, or any concerns you want raising, please talk to your branch reps about that meeting. It's not an all-member meeting. It's something that we have to do initially through the branch reps. Otherwise, it is simply be unmanageable. But please do contact your branches. Make sure that any concerns that you have about working terms and conditions, and the issue, all the issues that Jay has said that he can't really answer today because this is about working practices. Please do contact your branches. If you don't know who your branches are, please find out. Please get more involved in your branches. All of the work that's been happening today has come from active branches. It's not just from membership, but it's active branches, and that's where all that activity comes from. So now's a good time to get involved in that. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you everyone. We have been recording this, so it'll be going up on the BECTU YouTube channel, and you should be getting a link to it in 24 hours time. Thank you so much. I'm Nia Hughes, and thank you to Paul Evans, Jay Arthur, Stuart Learmonth, Jay Lusser, myself, and Spencer McDonald. Thank you everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you everybody for attending. Thank you.
Jay, we've got 20 minutes before the next one. See you in 20 minutes, Jay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.